Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. 2 days ago, the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, stepped down from his post, and there are already ominous signs that corporate censorship, is about to worsen on this platform. Dorsey was replaced by Parag Agrawal, who is already making it incredibly clear that he's not really a friend of free speech and he doesn't really feel any obligation to protect the First Amendment. His first move at Twitter has been to rewrite the rules of what can and cannot be posted on the social media platform, arguably making it impossible to do any kind of real, actual independent journalism or share any kind of media. Here's Twitter's latest policy. The guidance says, quote, "Beginning today, we will not allow the sharing of private media, such as images or videos of private individuals without their consent. Publishing people's private information is also prohibited under the policy, as is threatening or incentivizing others to do so," end quote. Now, anybody who's paid attention at all to the growing corporate censorship from Silicon Valley can read the tea leaves here. It means that this corporate censorship is about to get much worse. And Twitter is essentially saying that they reserve the right to pull down or ban any reporting from the citizens that they don't like. I mean, and of course, come to mind investigative journalists like Project Veritas, because it says in the actual statement that Twitter put out, it literally says, unless it's covered by mainstream media. And by the way, all of these things, whether it's Project Veritas or any other outlet, they're not breaking any laws. In fact, Project Veritas goes to great lengths to avoid that, and so do other outlets and independent videographers, for instance. But they do record people, and they do expose corruption and rioting and all kinds of stuff, right? And they post this video footage, whether it's Project Veritas or other individual videographers, they post it to platforms like Twitter. But think about what this new policy says. So it says, quote, "Beginning today, we're not going to allow the sharing of private media, blah, 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 without their consent." So investigative reporting is going to be effectively banned on Twitter. And you know that the other platforms will soon follow. Twitter's saying that they're going to ban them if they choose to. We'll talk about that more in a second. Now, to back up a bit, it was a little less than a year ago that then CEO Jack Dorsey said corporate censorship was coming to Twitter. It's a huge difference between just censorship and corporate censorship. This was right after January 6th in the Capitol riot. Twitter had just banned the President of the United States from the platform, and he said it was just the beginning, hardly the last person that would be banned. Watch.
You know, we are focused on one account right now, but this is going to be much bigger than just one account, and it's going to go on for much longer than just this day, this week, the next few weeks. It's going to go on beyond the inauguration. We have to expect that. We have to be ready for that.
Clearly, Dorsey knew what was going to happen because he was the CEO, right? Now, he's predicting that it's going to happen at an increasing pace, but it doesn't even feel like he's all that excited about it. More like he's just had to be coaxed out to do this video from his yurt because he was too busy smoking pot. I'm not quite sure. He says it's getting worse. So he's this, Silicon Valley billionaire who once wore a Stay Woke t-shirt, and we thought he was bad, but it's about to get a lot worse. And he's taken a lot of flack for Twitter's behavior. But the truth is that he's been a free speech advocate. And he wanted Twitter to be a platform, he said, to give a voice to the public. He said that from the beginning, although his actions didn't reflect it. So when Twitter censored a New York Post piece about Hunter Biden's laptop right before the 2020 elections, which many felt helped to assist Joe Biden in securing the presidency because of the media coverage, Dorsey kind of admitted that it was sort of wrong. He tweeted this, quote, "Our communication around our actions on the @NY Post article was not great, and blocking URL sharing via tweet or DM with zero context as to why we're blocking, unacceptable," end quote. By the way, my account was one of those. I was suspended for like 2 days because I had literally shared the New York Post piece. It was an extraordinary act of overt corporate censorship by Twitter, and it really did alter the future of the country, especially since the New York Post piece about Hunter Biden's laptop was true. All the stuff coming out from it is true. It all has to do with China, and it all has to do with cobalt and mining and the better Build Back Better or Biden's bankrupting bill, I think is what we should call it. And Dorsey admitted that it was a grave mistake to censor the piece about Biden. So all of this is to say, while Dorsey is imperfect on corporate control of speech, his stepping down is bad, especially as it relates to free speech in Silicon Valley. Dorsey took a lot of heat, as he should have, as we just said already 2 paragraphs ago, but it's not clear as to what he actually wanted. So in fact, insiders say Dorsey felt trapped by the leftist culture. Did he though? And the extraordinary pressure that governments and public health authorities put on social media companies to ban what they call misinformation. So Dorsey's stepping down. I wonder where he's going to go after this. And immediately, Twitter ramped up the corporate control. So looking at the new incoming CEO of Twitter now, Dorsey's gone. His replacement is no supporter of free speech and unfettered debate. I mean, literally, in an interview last year, he said, quote, "Our role is to not be bound by the First Amendment. Our role is to serve a healthy public conversation," end quote. So the new Twitter CEO is saying that he doesn't care about the First Amendment. He just thinks Twitter's role is to serve a healthy public conversation. Okay, so who decides what is or is not a healthy public conversation? I mean, the leftist-dominated company of Twitter. So when the new CEO says he intends to keep conversations on Twitter healthy, what's he talking about? Censoring people? Like the people who yesterday were threatening to shoot my kids because of the shooting that took place in Michigan, and they wanted to express their discontentment with school shootings by threatening to shoot other people's kids? Like that? Because that's allowed to stay up. Already, corporate control of speech on Twitter goes in one direction. Like Donald Trump is still banned from Twitter to this day, yet Twitter allows the Taliban spokesperson, their spokesperson, because they have one, to tweet to his 500,000 followers. And yes, he's able to actually physically tweet. You know, the radical Islamic government that aided and abetted al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, the terrorist group that perpetrated 9/11, but Trump can't tweet. So think about that. The corporate control is not stopping with Trump. Everybody knows Twitter's algorithms suppress thought leaders and politicians. I mean, I've literally had my followers frozen for 3 months straight before with receipts. Some mornings I think some mornings I wake up and I've lost thousands of followers. In fact, October 31st of last year, I lost approximately 30,000 followers in one night. People tell me all the time that they have to refollow after magically being dropped. I have to refollow. I've had to refollow my husband twice. And I didn't unfollow him, not even after an argument. So this is happening to conservatives across the board. Anybody who challenges any kind of dominant corporate media narrative finds that they have warnings put on their tweets if they're not banned altogether. It's selective corporate control, and it's enforced against conservative political leaders with views distasteful to the woke elite in Silicon Valley and against independent journalists like, I don't know, name one. And like people like Alex Berenson, New York Times staff writer. I mean, there's a ton of them. People who talk about responses to COVID reaction, to the COVID plan and pandemics and lockdowns. People are suspended and banned for questioning them or questioning boosters. This is the backdrop and context for Twitter's latest community guidelines. Now, keep in mind, they're very intentionally vague wording about not allowing posts that feature private individuals and how they would have eliminated this. Would, in fact, one of the things that, and I put this in my newsletter, and it's incredibly important that we mention this here. They actually say, quote, "We will always try to assess the context in which the content is shared, and in such cases, we may allow the images or videos to remain on the service. For instance, we would like to take into consideration whether the image is publicly available and whether it's being covered by mainstream traditional media." That's the big thing, whether it's being covered by mainstream or traditional media. And then they'll determine, and then I guess Twitter will determine then at that point the public interest value of it, which is kind of nuts when you consider it. So mainstream media and traditional media, again, they're going to make that determination. So that means everything about Kenosha, everything about Waukesha, everything about the occupied, what is it, the Chop Zone in Seattle and in Portland, all of the riots, any kind of anything like that, unless it's being covered by mainstream media, Twitter is not going to allow it. Do you realize that some of the biggest news stories of the past decade have not been broken by mainstream media? That they've been broken by independent journalists? That it's one of the purest sources of information you could possibly have. Someone who is on the ground, whether they're live streaming or whether they're posting footage in real time. And Twitter says that they're not going to consider that actual media? This sounds like the fairness doctrine, which, by the way, is a whole other situation. It also sounds like Chuck Schumer's proposal from 8 years ago, wherein he suggested that actual journalists be licensed in order to engage in journalistic practices. Not a joke. Google it. So Twitter says they're going to take into consideration whether it's, being covered by mainstream media. This is absolutely insane, and you should be up in arms about it. Really. I mean, so Twitter saying you're free to release any images that the media's released, but nothing else. So in other words, you got to be an echo chamber for corporate press. And if you want to push out an approved message, you're free to do so. But if you show content or imagery that tells a different story or that challenges the corporate defined narrative, Well, Twitter will make you quiet. They'll silence you. This is weird. Well, I've said earlier, it's Twitter muzzling independent journalists and only allowing corporate press to set like the standard on it. One of the things that's also a big question is how this relates to the Good Samaritan exemption offered by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. This is the other big issue, because this misrepresented bit of internet-based law, this is just to give you a backstory on this really quickly. Everybody's talked about Section 230 and the Good Samaritan protection afforded within that. It's from the Communications Decency Act. It was born out of 1994 out of a lawsuit against a very old ISP from the 90s called Prodigy. In fact, the people who filed the suit was the actual Wolf of Wall Street firm, Stratton Oakmont. An internet troll on Prodigy's ISP message board accused Stratton Oakmont of criminal activities. And under 47 U.S.C. 230, that's the Communications Decency Act, entities like message boards or website comment sections, this established that they could moderate for any offensive, i.e. illegal content, like unprotected speech, without them rising to the classification of a publisher. And that is that's the Good Samaritan protection, right? So you can block and you can screen offensive material. So entities that facilitate discussion or host discussions, whether it's Yelp content, comments, whether it's YouTube, Facebook even, they can't be considered publishers if they're not engaged in the act of moderating, editing, or curating beyond that Good Samaritan protection from Section 230. Now, I've discussed on air and in writing, I completely oppose the repeal of Section 230. However, this is the million-dollar question. How can Twitter claim that they're both and that they are both a public square and not a public square by redefining what is the reasonable expectation of privacy in a public space while enjoying exclusion from liability against unprotected speech, a privilege which publishers do not enjoy? That's the question. How does this decision by Twitter impact their 230 protections? Now, just as we saw with the new conservative online wave in the mid-aughts, tech responds with an attempt to blunt the effectiveness of independent operators that challenge government-led corporate narratives. So with this new rule, Twitter wants to control the narrative, the coverage, the information to which you are exposed. They want to run interference for corporate media. Why believe your own eyes when you can just believe what Twitter tells you, right? Or you can believe what corporate press tells you. All of this is even more concerning because corporate control of everything is growing everywhere all at once. And they're acting as government agents. That's the big key. YouTube, they're demonetizing and banning people left and right. Big tech censorship always goes one way, against independents, against conservatives, against people who ask questions. So corporate censorship goes against anyone who rises up to that challenge and questions it. Whether it's Kenosha, whether it's Waukesha, whether it's events like January 6th even, right? We all know at this point that you can't trust the coverage that you see, right? You can't. So corporate media is broken, controlled, corrupted beyond repair. The advent of the internet did many things, but its greatest contribution was that it broke the stranglehold of corporate press. It really did. And all the independent people out there, even before 2016, have been repudiating these lies and repudiating narratives for quite a long time, going against the CNNs and the MSNBCs and everyone else. We have a lot more in store for the show. Coming up, we're going to be talking actually be talking to an attorney for someone who is actually in jail for January 6th. We're going to talk to them. We're going to get into all of it. Stay with us. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation is skyrocketing. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills we can't pay for. It's time for you to take proactive steps to protect your wealth and retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington prints money to pay for their outrageous bills, but that just devalues your dollar. Gold offers a hedge against inflation, and as the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. They have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful info at legacypminvestments.com. Ryan Nichols, an honorably discharged U.S. Marine, is facing charges for his participation in the January 6th Capitol riot when apparently the whole country was going to be torn apart by people who showed up with flags. He was arrested on January 18th in Texas and has been this entire time in a jail cell in Washington, D.C. And he's got a hearing coming up on the 20th of this month where his attorney says evidence of overwhelming police brutality and misconduct from January 6th is going to be shown. Joseph McBride is Ryan Nichols' attorney, and he joins me now to give us some insight into this case. Joseph, thanks for being here. Since January 18th, I actually did not realize it was that long that he had been held.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. And yes, he's been in for upwards of 11 months now. Pretty soon it will be a year. It is a disgrace when you think about this man's life, the life he has lived, the type of humanitarian that he is, and the fact that he served his country honorably during a time of war. And now he's been held in jail in solitary confinement for the better part of almost a year. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, and so for people who don't know, one of the things that's being used to identify Ryan Nichols, at least in the press, everyone talks about how he was on Ellen before, and he had actually gone and saved dogs and after hurricanes and rising flood water. And then we have, the story that comes out. I wanted to ask you, what are his charges? Because I'm thinking, okay, if you're in jail since, almost for 11 months, that seems like that's something that you would do to an axe murdering serial killer, right? Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of stuff. That and I'm thinking, like, when I first began looking into this, in his case particularly, I honestly thought, oh wow, if he's, if they're holding him, and again, I didn't at the time realize it was since January 18th. I thought it was maybe perhaps recently. If they're holding him this entire time, he had to have done something just absolutely heinous. So I looked at his charges. Tell me where I'm wrong here. Civil disorder. I don't know what the aiding and abetting charge is about, but obstruction of official proceedings, which I don't think he even got inside to disrupt anything, disorderly and disruptive conduct, and then of course some of those charges are separate as it relates to being on Capitol grounds. So what am I missing in terms of seriousness of charges that justifies being held for 11 months?
There is absolutely no justification under the law or under any type of court precedent for this type of, for this duration of incarceration during this time. In the United States of America, pretrial detention is the exception and liberty is the norm. If you were to take away the fact that this happened on January 6th and look at these charges in a vacuum and then compare and contrast them to Mr. Nichols's personal history, there would be no way under the sun that he would have been held in for this amount of time pre-trial. But because he is a right-leaning conservative American with who's not down with sort of the liberal mainstream media way of life, he has been targeted and he has been improperly and unjustly held for almost a year in jail. It's a violation of his constitutional rights, a violation of his civil rights, and it's wrong.
I mean, that's the thing that just floors me, because it's not like he's a flight risk. I mean, it's not like he's going to go and re-offend with more disorderly conduct. I mean, it's not like he's, an Antifa member out there burning down cities or driving SUVs through parades of people. I mean, this was a guy who showed up on January 6th, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And as I understand, the conditions aren't that great either. Tell me a little bit about that.
The conditions of confinement are nothing short of abysmal. The vast majority of that jail has already been condemned. There is black mold on the walls. There's lack of proper hygiene. There is lack of ventilation. There is lack of sunlight. There is lack of good food, any type of normal food. There's reports of feces and urine in the food, worms in the food, improper medical care, beatings. People are persecuted on a regular basis for the color of their skin. People are persecuted on a regular basis for being involved in the January 6th cohort. If you are a white Republican Christian in that jail, your life is in danger. There is no doubt about it.
Now, tell me about the hours of footage that you have seen, because we've seen like some footage and we've seen some stills. I know that there's cameras all over the Capitol complex, and apparently is something like 14,000 hours of footage or something to that extent. Tell me about what has been released and what hasn't, because I see from court documents, they describe certain things that discussing Ryan, but tell me a little bit about this, because if you had to, give us a percentage of what the public has actually seen from footage, how much of it would you say we've actually seen?
The public has seen less than 5%. There's no doubt about it. And what the public has seen has been selectively, heavily edited video clips so as to contribute to the narrative that January 6ers are mindless drones who blindly support President Trump. They are prone to extremism. They are domestic terrorists and or insurrectionists. This has been artfully and purposefully done between a marriage. On one side, you have the Department of Justice led by Merrick Garland. On the other side, you have the left-leaning mainstream media who are working overtime to poison the jury pool. So by the time that these cases go to trial, the prospective jurors will have been inundated and spoon-fed this narrative, which is false. It is straight up false. So just as recently as this morning, I filed in Ryan Nichols' case a motion asking for multiple videos to be unmasked. The vast majority of the discovery in this case is electronic videos. The vast majority of those videos are subject to a protective order, which hamstrings the defense's ability to advance a counter narrative in the public and to do so in the court at this present time. We are hoping that based on my motion and some other motions that these protective orders will be dispensed with and that we will be able to counter this false narrative with the truth.
Now explain, one of the charges that he had, I think it was a weapons charge, was dropped because one of the narratives that we heard constantly, and I have a whole folder of this saved, where it was reported that these were armed insurrectionists. Everybody was armed. And well, I mean, we know gun laws in Washington, D.C., and they aren't able to actually carry in the Capitol complex unless you have special permission from the Sergeant at Arms or you're a member of the House, et cetera, and you have permissions. But he had a crowbar and a bullhorn. Tell me about the charge that that was dropped, because I find that interesting. That's kind of how blown up that is, yet it contradicts the narrative that they pushed about how these people were armed with like firearms, and he had a crowbar and a bullhorn. Tell me about that.
Sure. So he's been, in terms of weapons, he's charged with a crowbar, and he's charged with possessing and using an alleged can of OC spray. What I can say is this: he did not buy any OC spray. He did not bring any OC spray with him. There were multiple instances of either agent provocateurs and or undercover government agents in the crowd, either trying to sequester weapons or purposefully distributing weapons in the crowd. We don't know yet. We're investigating. But Ryan was handed a bottle of OC spray from somebody who we believe to be an undercover agent. If that person is in fact an undercover agent, that charge will be defeated. That's entrapment. You can't do that. In terms of him bringing a crowbar, I mean, look, you have a Second Amendment right in this country to defend yourself. If you're not allowed to carry a gun in D.C., and if you are allowed to bring a crowbar, you're allowed to do that under the law. Bringing a crowbar to a protest where you reasonably anticipate that Antifa might show up in black bloc and pound you and beat you like they have done to Trump supporters all over the country doesn't make you an insurrectionist. It makes you an American citizen with forethought, thinking about the danger that you might be walking into and saying, if something does happen, I will have the ability to defend myself. The people on the left may not like that, but that's too bad. The Second Amendment says that you are specifically allowed to carry an item on you for personal defense. They are trying to attack the Second Amendment. They're trying to do away with the Second Amendment, and they are typecasting January 6ers who brought some type of protective device as insurrectionists. Right. That is the furthest thing from the truth. I think you make
an interesting point here, because on one hand, somebody could say, well, if he's bringing a crowbar to a protest, he's going there looking for trouble. But at the same time, this is the same city where we watched Senator Rand Paul almost get beaten in the street by Antifa rioters. I watched an Uber driver have his limo set on fire in 2016 by Antifa rioters. I've watched people exit fundraisers at different hotels and who were beset upon by Antifa rioters. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility to expect that even if you don't think at that particular protest there might be some of that pushback, at some point, considering the nature of things, you will probably meet it if you are there to express your First Amendment rights. And there were a lot of people. At this point, I don't know how anybody wouldn't want to have something to be able to defend themselves. And I think you make a really good point there, a distinction that has not previously, I don't believe, been made elsewhere. And so that's like so one of those charges they're actually trying to maintain, correct?
Yes, they've dispensed with a few of the misdemeanor
weird.
charges. I think that they've dispensed with them just because of the time that he's been in jail. You can only do up to a year in jail on a misdemeanor. They're moving forward with the felony charges. We're going to beat those felony charges at trial. They have to prove every element of each crime charge beyond a reasonable doubt. They're not going to be able to do that here. They're threatening people with decades and decades in jail, people who have no previous experience with the criminal justice system, and they're holding them under egregious circumstances and conditions so as to force an unjustifiable plea from them. About 60% of the guys who are in DC right now, they're veterans. These are people who have gone to war. They love their country. They've been discharged from the military under honorable circumstances. These guys are fighters and these guys are patriots. This is the cohort of people who are just not going to roll over and die because the big bully in the schoolyard says, I'm going to come and get you. These are the people who are going to stand up and punch the bully straight in his face.
In dealing with this case, have you found were you able to compare like what the conditions that your client Ryan Nichols is going through and his pretrial detention, et cetera, and compare that like with, for instance, back in the 70s, Democrats bombed the Senate building. I'm not quite sure what their pretrial confinement was. Have you been able to compare that?
You make a great point. The pretrial confinement in this case is egregious, but to your point about the Senate bombing, the one that happened in 1983. Elizabeth Ann Duke bombed the Senate along with Susan Rosenberg. Susan Rosenberg was subsequently sentenced to 56 years of incarceration. After doing about 15 years on his last day in office, President Bill Clinton commuted her sentence, let her out, and she went on to be one of the primary fundraisers for Black Lives Matter, raising over $90 million over the course of a few years for that Marxist organization. And if you look at Elizabeth Ann Duke, she was granted bail, went on the run. If you look up the FBI's most wanted domestic terrorist, she's still on the list right now. You can Google it right now and she'll still be there. But in 2009, under the Obama administration, then Attorney General Eric Holder quashed her indictment, killed her arrest warrant, and had her case dismissed. And when an investigation was called for, and said, hey, this woman bombed the Capitol. How can you dismiss her charges against her and just give her a pass? She's been on the run for years and years and years. There was an investigation that happened, and the chief judge of the district court at that time killed the investigation. That chief judge, none other than Merrick Garland.
Oh, that's very fascinating. I actually was not aware that Garland was involved. That's very interesting. We're talking about the Ryan Nichols case because there's so many cases with us, and Joseph McBride, the attorney for Mr. Nichols. The court documents. One of the things that, and I was looking at some of the court documents that are put out there. And again, just to reiterate, I always am very hesitant to accept at face value whatever I see that's. I have not been a fan of corporate media for probably over a decade, and one of the things that the court documents were stating, as it was reported, was that Ryan Nichols was saying, "Hear our civil unrest, and this is not a peaceful protest." I don't find, I personally don't find anything actionable about that. Are they trying to say that that's incitement? His speech is incitement here? Is that why that's included in all of this?
Yes, they're trying to say that this somehow qualifies him as a leader of a rebellion. It couldn't be further from the truth. He had just found out after watching an innocent woman take a beating, a horrible beating in the tunnel from a uniformed Metropolitan Police officer. Ryan Nichols then found out that Ashley Babbitt, also a United States military veteran, had been shot. He had seen an untold amount of brutality at that time, just found out that somebody had been shot. He was worried that other people were going to be victimized by what was happening. So he said, hey, people, this is no longer peaceful. You have to defend yourselves at some point. I understand that we all came here to protest, but if we're being attacked, we have a right to defend ourselves. He was giving knowledge to the crowd. He was letting people know, hey, listen, if you get attacked, it is okay to defend yourself, because that is exactly what the law says.
Which is very different from the characterization that it was an aggressive move that was made first. And it's just unbelievable. To remind people, if they think that this is somehow out of character for government, I'd like to remind everybody about the John Doe raids in Wisconsin, where, I mean, that was pretty, people need to just Google that and look that up, or what we saw happen after the 2016 election. Joseph McBride, attorney for Ryan Nichols. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us, giving us some of your time. We're going to watch this case, and I know we'll circle back with you. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Of course. So coming up yesterday, a judge ordered a nationwide block on Biden's vaccine mandate, specifically for healthcare workers. We're going to break it down with Florida Congressman Brian Mast next. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover, and that's home title fraud. Law enforcement says it's one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially. So you should check out Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on documents stating that you sold your home to them, and they can take out loans against your home and leave you with payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect anyone, from a cyber thief to a renter or a relative trying to forge their way onto your home's title, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you are or could be potentially a victim, and enter code radio for 30 free days of protection. A federal judge issued a preliminary injunction yesterday to halt the start of President Biden's national vaccine mandate for those frontline workers, the healthcare workers, which had been set to begin next week. Florida Congressman Brian Mast has been on the front lines of this fight. He joins me now to discuss what this means for workers everywhere. Congressman, so good to be with you. Thank you so much too for your fight on this, because these are people these were the frontline workers. This is what, I mean, people were like on their balconies in New York, if they have balconies there, and they were all applauding frontline workers, and it was like this global thing. Now, these people are being condemned, and they're being called selfish if they don't get an injection, and a lot of them have natural immunity, and it doesn't matter because that doesn't count. Talk to us a little bit about how important this is.
No, so one, the case is important just because it's helping those frontline healthcare workers. That's a really big deal, but I'd love to talk about it just a little bit more broadly, because we're talking about a much broader swath of people that are affected by the mandate as a whole, other private businesses, you name it. And I would make two important points to you, I think, on this. Number one, let's go back to the fact that trillions of dollars were spent to make sure that people kept their jobs through the CARES Act and other things throughout this whole COVID pandemic, right? And so now the government's going to go back and say, hey, fire all of those people that everybody else's tax dollars went to make sure that they kept their jobs. That's just crazy enough to be thought up in Washington, D.C. To me, this is the more nefarious part of all of this. Whether you're talking about any variant of the virus, we know this is about power. And here's how I think it's really very deeply about the swamp and power. Think about this, whether it's members of the military or some kid at West Point or somebody in a private company or the State Department or some other government agency, right? They're essentially, the left is using coronavirus to wash them out of government. The left is using coronavirus to say, okay, they're self-identifying, saying, you know what, maybe I don't want to get this vaccine because it might cause infertility or it might cause something else, but they're self-identifying as conservative. And now the government's able to say, okay, you're not going to be the next person to commission in the U.S. Army. You're never going to become a lieutenant or a general or anything else. You're not going to advance the next generation of service members. And that goes to all of those different lanes. They're able to wash conservatives out of government. And I think they're licking their chops over it.
That's actually a really good point. And I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I would be so hesitant to even remotely look like I was, interested or agreeing with it. But after everything we've seen from even before 2016, up until now, the Wisconsin, I just talked about this last segment, Wisconsin John Doe raids, everything that we saw with the FBI following 2016. Oh, yeah, completely. And then the FBI Gretchen Whitmer thing. I completely do not put it past anybody who has an appetite for tyranny. I do not put it past them to engage in something like this as a way to further control. Now, to that point, tomorrow, apparently, as it's being reported, we're supposed to get more restrictions as it relates to the coronavirus and the pandemic, which we just learned this afternoon that apparently there's a positive case of Omicron or Omicron, depending on if you're listening to Fauci and Biden or scientists, that was identified in California. And apparently right now they're just saying that it's probably only going to extend to Americans that are traveling internationally and then coming back into the United States. But everything's still on the table, according to Jen Psaki. It might also be domestic flights as well. I wanted to ask if you knew anything about it, what your thoughts were, and what Congress or what Republicans can do to kind of push back on this, if indeed it is, we're looking at domestic travel restrictions.
Yeah, listen, so we know they're coming up with stupid policies, but they're not stupid about the way that they do these things. They do boil these frogs slowly. And so this is the same way it's gone through this whole thing, is to say, well, it's just for this. It's just for this period of time. And then that extends, right? Everybody's been talking about the 2 weeks to slow the curve 2 years ago. Well, we know where we're at today. It was just that. Now it's just this. Now it's just that. And it keeps going and going and going. There's no reason to think this will be any different. They'll find a way to expand it to, those that are in elementary school, and then they'll expand it to those that are in the healthcare workforce, and then they'll expand it to those that are in the military or somewhere else. They will find ways to keep looking for different lanes to do it. What do we do in the government? Something that I never imagined that we would have to do. I mean, to think in this land of liberty, freedom, and independence that we would have to write a law. I wrote a bill saying, hey, you know what? If you're an employer, you can't ask somebody about their vaccination status. That is a violation of their civil liberties on a whole host of different fronts. Is Pelosi going to move that whatsoever? And all of the other great ideas that some of my colleagues have about how to combat this, she's not going to move one of them. They're not interested in moving it in the slightest. They're interested in the opposite. They're interested in the tyranny of coronavirus and what they can use it for. So, the front of it is, we're going to do everything we can. But we know the numbers when we go to the floor of the House, and the fact that, Speaker Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, none of them are going to have anything to do with combating this whatsoever.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that they would even try at this point, because the polling, I was looking at some of the polling numbers for Democrats in Congress and really the administration as a whole. I don't know that I think in my career I've ever seen it actually this bad. And he's not even in his first full year. The administration hasn't even been implemented for a 1 full year. And yet we're looking at I think Gallup was saying that it's out of all of the years that they've measured it, this is one of the lowest that they've seen, whether it's NBC, Washington Journal. I'm looking at all the every poll, basically, all of them.
It actually gives you a little bit of hope, right? It gives you a little bit of hope to think that, because if the Democrats' party's total premise moving into the last election cycle was to run against everything of a president that said America first in this lane, this lane, this lane, and they had to be the opposite of all of that, it actually gives me a little bit of hope that some people realize, hey, we do want to put our country first. And that's actually a really good idea. We should do some more of that.
Looks like you may have that majority coming up after midterms. Congressman Brian Mast from the Sunshine State. I'm telling you. Thank you so much, sir. Good to see you.
Take care. You too.
Mm-hmm. So coming up, as we just touched on, more coronavirus travel restrictions are expected to be announced tomorrow by the administration. Some details have been released. They're going to make your head spin. We'll break it down. Stay with us. Every day, our liberty is challenged more and more, and America may have been founded on the idea of freedom, but it's clear the administration now, the Biden administration, has a new agenda. Sadly, freedom isn't guaranteed, and everyone must act to defend it. So you can help defend it by supporting the First TV, and today's your last chance to save 20%. And as a First TV supporter, you're part of the only network dedicated to protecting free speech and pushing back against the mob, the Inquisition mob that wants to destroy the country. And you can also get access to premium content from all your favorite folks here on the First, exclusive emails, and other membership benefits. Enjoy weekly specials on demand through the website and the First TV app, and you have access to exclusive Facebook community that will never censor you. Video calls, chats with the host, also access to members only inbox, where you can share your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, and premium live access from events across the country. Sign up today and get 20% off the first year of your annual subscription. Becoming a First TV supporter is easy. Just visit thefirsttv.com or log into the First TV app for more information. Black Rifle Coffee develops their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus they've learned as military members, and they've spent thousands of hours tasting and sourcing and perfecting coffee from across the world. And being founded and operated by veterans, Black Rifle Coffee knows what a quality cup of coffee means to active duty troops who are away from home for the holidays. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to supporting all who serve, and with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. And for every coffee purchase you make, a bag of their limited edition holiday roast will be sent to a service member overseas. So help support the cause and visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and check out the freshest coffee in America. blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV gets you 20% off their coffee, the apparel, and gear, plus 20% off of the first month of the coffee club. So the Omicron variant, or Omnicron, as Joe Biden would say, is here with the first case being reported out of California, and right on cue, the Biden administration is about to announce new restrictions on travel. So is Omicron more dangerous? No, it's not. In fact, South African doctors, I've been playing Dr. Angelique Kotisi, who's the head of the South African Medical Association. She's been one of the first to go out and say, actually, it's incredibly mild. But facts are not important. What's important is using the latest variant as a pretext for greater government control over your life. So get ready to hear the latest case counts and all the usual talking heads to come on television, and at every turn tell us it's better to be safe than sorry. So everyone put your face panties back on. Get boosted. Lock yourselves in the bathroom. Sit in your bathtub. But if you must leave your house and travel into that big, open, dangerous world by plane, the Biden administration might have some new restrictions that you're going to have to deal with, even if you're vaccinated or you already contracted it naturally in the wild and you have natural immunity. And you thought that being vaccinated was your ticket back to Normalville. No, the train to Normalville that departed back in 2020. You're on the COVID crazy train now. In fact, I think the train to Normalville, yeah, it really did. We all boarded back in the day like sheep, right? When everyone said 15 days to slow the spread. So now it's 2 years and there's no getting off. And all the new policies that will likely be announced Thursday, we're still getting some of the details, but here's what they're probably going to be according to reports. Washington Post has a roundup. So if you want to travel overseas before you touch down in the U.S., the administration is likely going to require a negative test taken just 1 day before boarding flights. It does not matter if you've been vaccinated or if you've already had coronavirus. Sales of the I got triple vaxxed and all I got was this lousy t-shirt are about to go through the roof. But that's just getting started. And in fact, they're also going to have quarantine periods. So you can't have anybody running around with a very mild case of Omicron. So there's probably going to be post-arrival testing, because you might have pulled your double, triple face panty down long enough to eat a stale peanut on the plane and you got Omicron. Yeah, you could be a walking vector for something like a mild cold. And when you land, do your part, which means letting them stick a swab up to your brain. All of these tests will drive up the cost of travel, by the way, but nobody cares because money grows on printing presses. And Biden will make more of it and then send you some, except if you're, only if you're crossing the border, though, apparently. So lastly, like we said, quarantining. You're going to have to quarantine for 17 days. This is after landing, even if your test is negative, even if you have natural immunity, and even if you're vaxxed or triple vaxxed or boosted or whatever the hell it is. So why did they stick the swab up your nasal pharynx if they're going to ignore the test results? Just obey, right? Just be a good little masked disease vector and quarantine yourself away from humanity for 7 days. By the way, there's also talk that there could be significant escalation in the United States COVID rule enforcement. They're kicking around some fun ideas like quarantine camps, like they do in Australia, which, by the way, why in the hell does the left always go the camp route? Can you stop with your obsession with camps? Maybe a digital passport. They might suggest that so they can track your every move. It'd be a shame if they had to turn off your access to the grocery store because you broke quarantine. I'm not kidding. Who knows how they intend to enforce these quarantines, really? IRS agents, is that what it is? Apparently, also, lastly, they're going to ban flights from additional Omicron hotspots, like specifically Africa, even though Biden did not like the African ban. But now he's going to do it. It's no longer racist because Democrats are doing it, and it's not Trump. And if that doesn't make sense, what's wrong with you? Are you Omicron? Yeah. We are moving in one direction with this, a slow, incremental crackdown on your freedoms in order to contain endless variants. Obey and get back to normal. But then the longer that you obey, it's like the further we get from returning to normal ever again. I don't like to obey. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.